The federal government is set to pass groundbreaking climate legislation that will cut carbon emissions over the next decade. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese announces a review of Australia's defence capabilities just as regional tensions hit boiling point, and why men's underwear and women's hemlines are good economic indicators. It's Thursday, the 4th of August, 2022. Welcome to Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael. Are you ready for the women's hemlines, men's underwear story?
I have no idea what you have in store for us today. I am suitably intrigued without sounding like a creep.
Let's just leave that for the end of the show. It's Thursday, Michael. It's Safe Word Day.
It is. And so safe word is our lighter look. Saying it's our lighter look at the world of business feels like I'm kind of understating it. It is very light.
It's definitely not understated.
No, that is right. And look, Safe Word comes out every Thursday. It is in its own playlist. You can find it just by searching for Safe Word by Fear and Greed wherever you listen to podcasts. And make sure you hit follow or subscribe so that you get it every Thursday rather than having to wait a few more days to get it. It is just something a little bit lighter. There's a little bit of a business feel to it, so it's safe to listen to at work. You're not going to get in trouble from the boss because you're listening to a business-themed podcast.
Maybe.
Just make sure you do it through headphones.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Immediately after the show today, Sean, you've got a chat with Don D'Souza from HSBC all about the rules of investing in a rising interest rate environment.
That's right. We saw the Reserve Bank lift rates again earlier this week. And if you remember yesterday morning, we spoke to Gareth Aird about what it means for the economy. Today, it's about what it means for investing.
Yeah, it's a good one. But the main story this morning, Sean, the federal Greens will support the government's climate change legislation in the upper and lower house, meaning a 43% reduction in emissions by 2030 is likely to become law.
It's a big win for the Albanese government and also for Greens leader Adam Bandt, who has been able to get his party over the line, notwithstanding some thought the new laws don't do enough. The Prime Minister said it was a chance to end the climate wars and conceded there would be some amendments passed in the House of Representatives under the deal with the Greens, but he did say they were sensible. There, of course, are still some threats from some Greens that they'll cross the floor, but that's not expected. It looks like there will finally be a legislated emissions target in Australia, just like many, many other developed nations.
Sean, one of the big goals of the Greens was to stop any more coal and gas developments. It was a big goal.
It was, and they didn't get it, but they did get some other things. They got what Mr. Bandt called Dutton-proofing, referring, of course, to the leader of the opposition, Peter Dutton. The 43% figure is a floor. The Greens got that, and the target can't go backwards. There's also changes to strengthen the Climate Change Authority and other agencies involved in the carbon emissions debate.
It's a very big development. What was the response?
Generally, it was welcome. In fact, business really welcomed the decision, saying it provided certainty. One of the biggest challenges for companies wanting to invest in the future, particularly in emissions and energy-intensive industries, is just knowing the ground rules. Because it's been so much argy-bargy going on for decades, it's been difficult for businesses to plan around reducing emissions, not just the carbon-intensive businesses, but everyone else as well. Now there's a framework for business to work in, and that provides certainty, and they were really happy about that yesterday.
All right. How did local markets perform?
The S&P ASX 200 finished the day down 0.3% to 6,976 points. It just couldn't quite build on Tuesday's gains to push through the 7,000-point mark. It would have been much worse, but for a strong performance by the tech stocks, WiseTech Global closed up more than 3%, while Xero jumped 3.6%. The banks had a poor day. Commonwealth Bank, Westpac and Macquarie Group all fell around 1.5%. The retailers fell by about the same amount. That's Wesfarmers, Woolworths and Coles. Energy giant Santos was off 2%. Among the large caps, James Hardie Industries rose 1.5%, while South32 and QBE Insurance were both up more than 1%. Industrial property giant Goodman and iron ore miner Fortescue Metals also outperformed. In corporate news, Pinnacle Investments jumped 13% after reporting a higher than expected profit. Lynas Rare Earths jumped more than 7% after it announced a $500 million expansion of the Mount Veld mine to meet demand for its ore. And on the other side of the coin, new delays to the long-awaited chest replacement project sent ASX shares down nearly 4%. It was the worst performer on the day.
And what about international markets?
Comments from Federal Reserve officials early yesterday morning, Australian time, signalling that the world's most important central bank was committed to aggressively fight inflation, sent bond yields higher and Wall Street a touch lower. In essence, the officials said there were more interest rate rises to come. Now, that helped the US dollar, sending the Aussie dollar lower. It's back trading around 69 US cents. Brent crude is at around $100 US a barrel, while the price of gold is creeping higher. It's worth around $1,770 US an ounce.
All right, we'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has announced a review of the Defence Force and wants a frank assessment of Australia's defence capabilities.
The review will be led by former Labor Defence Minister Stephen Smith and former Military Chief Angus Houston. Its goal is to ensure Australia is equipped to meet its security challenges over the next decade. At the announcement, Air Chief Marshal Houston said the world's strategic circumstances are the worst he's ever seen. Mr Albanese agreed, and when asked whether conflict with China is inevitable, the Prime Minister said it was vital that Australia did all it could to advance peace and security in the region, adding that China had taken a more aggressive posture in Asia Pacific. The announcement came as US House Leader Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan. We'll tell you more about that later in the show. Mr Albanese said Australia's position on Taiwan is clear. We don't want to see any unilateral change to the status quo, he said, and we'll continue to work with partners to promote peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait.
Okay, now, Sean, there is some hope that the winter COVID outbreak has peaked.
That's right, but Federal Health Minister Mark Butler isn't quite celebrating yet. There has been a reduction in case numbers in recent days and a near 10% reduction in hospitalisations, down to about 5,000. Mr Butler said he was hopeful that the latest BA4 and BA5 Omicron variants might have peaked earlier than expected. Let's hope so. Meanwhile, the Health Minister said the Vaccine Advisory Group had not recommended the rollout of vaccines to all under 5-year-olds because young children have a very low likelihood of severe illness. Kids between 6 months and 5 years who are immunocompromised, have complex health conditions, or have a disability will be able to get a jab from next month.
All right, good news. June quarter retail sales volumes hit a new record, Sean, but analysts warn that higher interest rates and cost of living pressures are really starting to bite.
Yes, first the good news. Retail sales volumes were up 1.4% despite higher prices. It was the third consecutive quarterly rise. Remember, we're talking volume here, not value, so just the number of things sold. Cafes, restaurants and takeaway food services led the way, but clothing, footwear and personal accessories also did well. The bad news is that economists don't think it will last and point to slumping consumer confidence as evidence. That played out in the share market yesterday, Michael, with a bunch of consumer discretionary stocks like Domino's Pizza and JB Hi-Fi falling.
Okay. The New South Wales government will adopt all 19 recommendations of the Bergen inquiry into the gaming sector and introduce additional measures to strengthen casinos' compliance requirements, including some recommendations from the Victorian Royal Commission.
Yes, and the Star Entertainment Group's share price fell 3.6% yesterday as a result. Now, the announcement got very little media attention. In fact, it came in the form of a New South Wales government press release on Tuesday night at 7:30 p.m. Now, there's plenty going on in that state, so the political reporters really didn't cover it. The press release said that the new New South Wales Independent Casino Commission will have powers to fine operators up to $100 million and hold individual board members and executives liable for serious wrongdoing under the legislation to be introduced to Parliament next week. Can you imagine being a board member of a gaming group if you can be held responsible for serious wrongdoing? Not sure.
No, the pressure's on. Tell you what, Sean, that's got all the makings of a sleeper story for our weekend edition of Fear and Greed, doesn't it?
It's mine.
Oh, of course. Of course, you jumped in first. Well done. And Sean, just while we are in New South Wales, an update on the Barilaro affair. The Premier, Dominic Perrottet, has asked the head of the Department of Premier and Cabinet to conduct a review into Trade Minister Stuart Ayres.
Yes, this is getting murkier. Mr Ayres yesterday said he'd resigned from the ministry and as deputy leader of the Liberal Party in the state. Of course, it follows criticism around his interaction with his department over the appointment of former Deputy Premier John Barilaro to a plum job in New York. The review by the Department of Premier and Cabinet will look at exactly that interaction between the former Premier and his department. There's still a lot more to play out on this one.
Yeah, there certainly is. Explosives group Orica will buy Axis mining technology for $350 million.
Yes, Axis has a geospatial technology that helps miners digitally assess ore bodies before they start physically exploring and drilling. Once the deal's done, Orica will be helping its customers find ore bodies and work out what resources they're sitting on, provide the blasting equipment, help with waste and emissions, and provide cloud-based technology to improve the efficiency of ore processing. I find this really interesting. It's high-tech mining. As the world increasingly looks for particularly more battery metals, they're going to have to dig deeper or in more remote areas. Using technology is becoming a much bigger part of the mining business. Obviously, Orica is trying to jump on board of that. This geospatial technology will help. I just think it's really fascinating.
Sean, one of the country's largest home builders, Metricon, will cut 9% of its 2,500 staff as it battles to keep afloat.
Many in the construction industry have been hit hard by rising prices and really been caught out. Metricon is the country's largest home builder with more than 6,000 new home starts last year. It is cutting costs in a desperate effort to keep going.
All right, moving on to overseas news. And you mentioned this one a little earlier, Sean, but US Speaker Nancy Pelosi has visited Taiwan, provoking Chinese military aggression near the island.
Ms. Pelosi said her presence in Taiwan was an unequivocal statement that America stands with the democracy of 23 million people. Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen awarded Ms. Pelosi one of the country's most important medals and said her country would do whatever it takes to strengthen its self-defense capability. Now, more significant to the rest of the world is China's response to the visit. Beijing yesterday called it egregious and denounced it as extremely vicious, saying it will have grave consequences. China has already blacklisted imports from 100 Taiwanese companies and flown military drills near the midpoint of the Taiwan Strait. Yesterday, it threatened more military exercises and warned commercial airlines not to fly in the region.
It's all pretty worrying, isn't it? Now, a new study shows that a fourth jab of Pfizer's RNA vaccine is much more likely to prevent COVID than triple vaccinated peers.
It's particularly relevant because the broad view has been that the latest Omicron variants were infecting people irrespective of vaccination status. However, of course, if vaccinated patients were showing milder symptoms, but they were still being infected, the new study shows the benefits of a second booster against infection. Doctors, nurses, and other healthcare workers who got a fourth mRNA shot in January showed a 7% infection rate. Those with 3 doses, the third having been administered by the end of September last year, saw an infection rate of 20%, 3 times that of those with a fourth jab.
All right, finally, Sean, you mentioned this one at the top of the show, teased us with it, a story about quirky indexes to decide if an economy like the US is heading into recession.
Yes, the story used to go here in Australia that the Reserve Bank governor would sit by his window watching container ships come in and out of Sydney Harbour and think about the economy in terms of how low the vessels sat in the water. Apocryphal, no doubt, but there are some genuinely quirky indicators, and indeed container rates is one. Now, former Federal Reserve Chair Alan Greenspan was a fan of tracking men's spending habits on underwear, based on the thesis that they'll put off buying boxers and briefs when times get tough. Hence, Michael, there is a men's underwear index.
Ah.
According to Bloomberg, there's a champagne index and a lipstick index. I kind of get those. There's also a hemline index. Apparently, hemlines go up during bull runs and down during busts. Short skirts in the roaring 20s, long dresses in the Great Depression. Think of it that way. And finally, there's a diaper index, as in nappies. Bad times, fewer diaper sales. There you go.
Gee, that one's an interesting one, isn't it? I don't really understand how that would work, because I would have thought that you would still need a minimum number of nappies.
Yes, I think the diaper index probably worked better when people weren't using disposable nappies. I'm guessing.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, every day, Sean, you find a way to educate me on something. And today you held it right till the very end, and then you busted that one out. Well done.
Thanks.
All right, up next is the Fear and Greed Daily Interview, and your guest today is Don D'Souza from HSBC.
That's right. As I mentioned, we talk about how to invest in a rising interest rate environment. We talk about banks and we talk about fixed income investments. Really interesting chat.
Yeah, it's a great one. It's coming up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. And of course, don't forget to check out the newer episode of Safe Word by Fear and Greed. Just have to search for that wherever you listen to podcasts. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
It's Thursday, the 4th of August, 2022. Make sure you're following the podcast and join us online on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.